messages about blogging work. One is where you sell work as an individual writer and get paid by someone who will then put it on in some form or other, which is the kind of knocking at the door kind of approach. And the other message is about perhaps taking a more active role in that and somehow being responsible for the means of production yourself, if you like, so that you don't feel quite so passive in that process. I mentioned, well, Joe's mentioned theatre there because I came into writing through theatre, and most of the money that I earn as a writer has been through theatre, but it's been through two routes which sort of represent that kind of point. One is that I've been commissioned by theatres to write plays which the theatre then puts on, and the other is by creating a theatre company, which is where I generated or raised the finances to put on my own stuff. I had a slight suspicion that, certainly coming out of university, which brought me here in the first place. Actually, I was at Warwick University, so I stayed in the Coventry area, and that I had a slight suspicion that no theatre was going to put on my work at all. Why should they? There was a model about selling work to theatres, which is about writing a play, putting it in a jiffy bag, sending it to all the theatres, and then waiting for them to ring you up and say, "This is amazing, we're going to put it on immediately." There was a study done around that whole process recently, where it was estimated that there were 30 to 40,000 unsolicited play scripts in circulation at any one time. And in the years 2008 to 2013, only one had ever been taken off the slush pile and put on by a theatre in that way. You'll notice that perhaps and that feels kind of representative of the entire commissioning process across all forms. One of the things when I was in book publishing I found absolutely terrifying was going into my publishers and walking past these piles and piles and piles of unsolicited scripts, manuscripts of novels, and often there would be an intern reading them, and someone who was like a work experience volunteer, and I remember thinking, are they really the gatekeepers for new literature? I mean, how's that? And the whole thing felt really desperate and depressing, and it felt like much more active and interesting to me anyway to try and form a company that maybe it was more easy to get Arts Council funding than it was to get a commission from a theatre. And so I made a theatre company which then put on work, and it was through the experience of doing that that I started getting commissioned by other theatres, and that's how that little route worked. The same thing, equivalent experience happened in radio too. It was through doing theatre work that I was seen by radio producers who then commissioned a series of radio plays and radio works off me. Enjoyed that, but I also realised that I was always knocking on the door and actually starting an independent radio company where I was involved in the commissioning of my own stuff. Felt like it was much more empowering, but also kind of gave me a better chance to have things happen for me. So it would be great to leave some time for questions, but I think my sort of broad message is that there's something very terrifying, demoralising, and in the keynote speech to some extent there's a certain sense in which you might wait 10 or 15 years before someone gives you some money. It might be possible to start thinking about sort of seizing the means of production yourself. Notice that with novels particularly too, that the whole self-publishing thing, which was seen as a kind of vanity exercise, has now been through e-books has become much more possible and accessible for people to get their writing out there, and that in itself leaves a range of other more conventional commissioning processes. So it's to think broadly about what it means to sell your writing. Most of the writing that I sell, I buy myself through other little companies. I think it might be worth, because no one ever really talks about money at these things, some of the economics of these, of writing, as far as my experience goes, is that a commissioned play at a theatre, if it's up to 70 minutes, it's around £4,500–5,000. If it's over 70 minutes, it can get up to 10 or so. It's one of the big London theatres, maybe 15 or 20,000. 45-minute radio drama is between £3,000 and £4,000. Short story on the radio, it's about 2,000 words, one voice, about 500 quid. You get paid something like that. For an episode of a soap, I think it's a long time since I've worked in soaps, but I remember roughly it was about sort of between £8,000 and £10,000 an episode. Not novels, it's really kind of crazy difference. I mean, it's some no advance, some have six-figure advances. I was in novels at a time when there were big advances paid, but there's not so much of that anymore. I bought a house with my first book, and that felt like the last days of the Roman Empire. I don't know what's happened to the publishing industry now. People talk about that. What else can you sell to? Selling lyrics to bands. So I remember working with Groove Armada and other companies. I used to get 500 quid for a song sometimes. Other little audio pieces kind of on an ad hoc basis. Corporate videos, they pay quite well. If you can kind of swallow the brief and kind of hold your nose a bit as you write those scripts. And then there are kind of grants that are available to you to do your own sort of writing too, which you can access through local authority funding or Arts Council or a range of others. If you want to hear, if there's something I haven't covered here that might know about that is of interest, feels like that's, but this is a selling one, isn't it? So it felt like it's not dirty to talk about money during it. That's me.
Yeah. And by all means, hold your questions and come back to all three of us, or four of us, all three, when we've had a chance to listen to Anna and Leila. Anna, do you want to take on from it?
I wanted to, there's some crossover in the way that I'm going to talk about it. The means of production I think is really important, really applies to film as well. But I also wanted to talk about networking, which is another dirty word, but actually really useful, and if you do it in the right way and most importantly in a way that feels true to yourself, then it can generate a lot of work. So I wanted to talk briefly about my kind of development. So I started doing the BA in English and creative writing over at Warwick. After that, I had about a year of doing really terrible jobs. Then I made a job for myself at BBC Audio, where I first worked as a receptionist, then worked my way to the studio, then developed as a producer. I was there for 3 years producing, so I produced about 100 audiobooks in that time. And I worked in a studio where it's just one-to-one. It was just the producer who's a director, essentially, but in audio it's called a producer. And you're working with one actor, so it was single voice recordings. I'd take a book, I'd prepare it in terms of accent, pronunciation, all these little details, and then I'd direct the actor in their reading. And it was really, really good fun. And for me, it married literature and performance, which are two of my favourite things. And across that time, I also made a load of contacts. I got friends with certain actors, and I also got the confidence of my boss there, who, when I left to come back to work and do the MA in writing there, she gave me work to write. So I did some writing for children for them. I wrote new versions of fairy stories, which were then read by Lenny Henry and Sheridan Smith. And I also, as a result of working there, got my first proper paid commission, which was a theatre play commissioned by an actor. And I love actors, but they're not the most organised people. So when they tell you they're going to put on the production themselves, take it with a pinch of salt. He bought the rights for a few years from me, and then other things happened and so on, so it didn't happen. So I then got those rights back, and then I developed that into a feature film script. Then moving on from then, I got commissioned by the UK Film Council, which still existed at the time, to make a short film. There was this scheme called Digital Short, and it's all really in flux at the moment. So if you don't know, the Film Council is now Creative England, and a lot of the structures that were in place have really disappeared. The BFI are also involved now in production, which I think is a good thing. But it's worth keeping an eye on those two organisations to see, because there are still some short films being funded. But when we talk about means of production, you can really make a short film for nothing. And what is really important is the content. So if you can show that you can tell a story and that you're in command of those things, that's what matters, not that you've spent £10,000, £20,000 on it. I taught for a while over at Warwick. I taught screenwriting on the writing programme there, and some of my students, I would get them to make short films every year, and because it was part of the ethos that make your own work, get it out there, and they did, and the most proactive group out of those students then got called in for a development meeting at BBC to see if their short film could be made into a series, and that was just by handing their film to a BBC producer, so that really is a good thing to think about. And it's worth just saying as well, in between all of this, I've had other writing commissions for TV and audio, but I've done an awful lot of other work as well, as was covered earlier. So I've started film festivals. I've gone out to places that I'm really interested in and people that I want to work with, and thought, okay, what can I do for them? Started partnerships and different things. So and that's still really rewarding as well, using your creative thinking in that way.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, hi. This is really interesting because I have no experience in any of these fields. I just write novels, and I specifically write for children and young adults. Write my own novels which are published by Osborne. I also write publisher-led novels, which are where the publisher comes up essentially with a concept and then finds a writer to write it. One of my previous jobs was as a bookseller, so I suppose I know a little bit about selling in that sense. So yeah, I thought, I looked at the sort of title of this session and I thought, well, what does selling really mean to a novelist? I suppose the first thing you might think of is you, the novelist, selling your novel to an agent or to a publisher, getting them to say, yes, we'll take this. The agent say, yes, I'll take it, and I'll try and sell it to the publisher. The publisher say, yes, I'll take it, and I'll try and sell it to the bookstores, etc. Then you have a whole other layer of people who you're also selling to and through, and these are your gatekeepers, quite often nowadays, including bloggers, for example, tastemakers of various kinds, booksellers, bookshops, bookstores, staff, and if you went into them, obviously there are a whole other, parents, librarians, teachers, etc. But you're always essentially saying to the final group of people, which is the audience, which also includes all the people already mentioned. And I think the question you have to ask yourself as you're writing is, are people going to buy this story? Are they literally and metaphorically going to buy it? Are they going to be won over by the story? And this is where your writing skills and your storytelling ability are really coming into play. So I think in a sense, selling is very close to writing well in that sense. So think about my own experience. As I said, I write for children and young adults, which is doing very well in comparison to most sectors of publishing. But every part of publishing is, it's tough to get published and it's tough to stay published. I think Society of Authors some time ago did a famous study where a survey where they asked their members how much to earn per annum from your actual writing, not from teaching, etc., and the average amount was £5,000 per year. And I have, in the past year, I've earned approximately 3 or 4 times that. This by writing 6 novels in 2 years. These are publisher-led novels, some for 8 to 12-year-old readers, some for YA readers. So, it's a way of doing it. So, yeah, publisher-led stuff, it's something you might not have heard about very much. It's writing to commission. It's more common than you'd think. At one end of the scale, you have companies, fiction book packages, such as working partners, reviewers, and kind of professionals, agency things. At the other end, it's always gone on in that a good agent will always steer their client towards opportunities, and always work with spouted by my agent, who was actually in the last session, Julia Church, if you were in there. The benefit of doing this kind of work is mostly essentially that it funds your own new novel on spec and trying to, you know, try and get out and sell it. I've never self-published. I know people who do. Selling direct to readers is certainly possible. It's a lot of work, is what I have heard and gathered. Because you have to do your own marketing, your own publishers, etc., etc. You have to try and get your book before readers. So yeah, it's absolutely possible, and it's ever more possible. I guess, yeah, since you're a student writer, I guess those of you who are interested in writing novels are probably thinking about selling your first novel. So I guess something to think about. My advice would be to ask yourself, what makes your novel essential to publish? What is going to make publishers say, we cannot not publish this novel because blah, blah, blah. And I think to find that reason, you have to kind of look for what is the core of the book. Not so much what is the concept, although you may have an extraordinary, outstanding, unique concept, but perhaps what's the question that's asking, what's it theme, what's it about. And if that doesn't seem to be particularly original or unique or etc., then what makes it better than, or a step on from, or in some way different from other books that are comparable. Other pieces of advice, and again, you know, I'm focusing here not on like, you know, artistic quality, etc. I'm focusing on selling your novel. If you can, try and sell your first novel in a genre that you want to stay in, so that your brand can be built on from that. Publishers like reliable, strong sellers. What you may well find is that you can be artistically restrained, even if you're writing the most literary fiction. You're still being constructed as a brand and can be sold as that. Other piece of advice, and to be flexible and versatile and take opportunities that come up, and be prepared to use your writing skills in many different ways. There are some you know, practical things that you can find out about, you know, how to write a cover letter. I'm not going to go into all that, but you can look about really online. If you look at Nicola Morgan's tweets, she does a whole book on the thing, or I'm sure it's in the right article here, but yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I think it's time for questions.
Thanks very much to all three of you. That's a whole load of information to digest. Are there any immediate questions coming from any of that? Any of you have burning queries that you want to follow up? Yes.
Say if you had a specific book, you said you need to stay in your genre. Say if you have a specific type of genre that you need to go, do you need to find publishers that would publish a certain genre, or do publishers publish a lot of different genres in one?
It depends on the publisher. I mean, some will, you know, like I think they call them Atom. You know, focus on sci-fi and fantasy, Orbit, or you know, focus on sci-fi, fantasy, etc. But then, you know, you'll have some other much larger publishers that do all kinds of things. You know, I suppose HarperCollins, you know, assembly conglomerates. But yeah, I mean, you know, if you know, I think the advice that Sarah gave in the keynote speech is spot on. You know, if you look at the book, you know, what is it like? What do you like reading? What is it comparable to what you're writing? Who publishes those books? You know.
It's a difficult balance, isn't it? That one, isn't it? Because on the one hand, there's a thing which is like the books that you like reading. You look at the imprint, so you know who the publisher is. There's often a bit of blurb about the writer, and at the acknowledgements at the end, they might thank their agent, if you like, so you know who the agent is. And so you might, I suppose, sort of reasonably think, well, here's a publisher that likes publishing this sort of work, and here's the agent that likes representing authors who write this kind of work. I'll just contact them, and you can get perhaps one of three replies. One is that, oh, I'm not interested. One is that, yeah, great, we want more of this because it sells. The other one is, well, I've already got one of those, haven't I? So I don't need you. So it does.
Just straightforward as that, so if you just go into the publisher and say, look, I've got some work, can you read it for me and tell me whether you're interested?
Well, there was a steer from this afternoon, which was about it's high risk to go direct to the publisher, because I say the slush pile they've got of unsolicited work, they tend to try and filter that down by getting representations from agents that they trust. I mean, I think there are a range of different routes into publishing, but the conventional one is that you try and interest an agent first, and then
you go straight to the agent and say, would you like to represent it?
Yeah, I mean, there's that thing, isn't it? There's the covering note, maybe a sample chapter. Do you want to read any more? If they do, send them the whole book. If they don't, then go to the next one.
Most of them have got websites, and the websites have submission guidelines, and they say we would like to see normally, a covering letter, first 2 chapters, a synopsis, and usually that's just on their website.
But something I had from the keynote speech, as well as the last session that I was in which was there was Julia Churchill, who was an agent. Nick's just been talking about the massive amounts of manuscripts received, and agents as well as publishers are under an enormous amount of pressure to actually process through and actually assess all the work coming in. So I think it's really important to stress, Sarah said something about professionalism in her keynote speech this morning, and I think it's really important to be professional and to do your research, a fairly basic amount of research. As you said, pretty much all agents have websites. It's not hard to just check whether what you want to sell to that agent is something that they're likely to be interested in. So when Julia in the last session was talking about she was working for an adult fiction agency, and they received a fabulous manuscript from Kathy Cassidy, who's a children's writer. That is an incredible exception. I mean, they essentially spawned a children's division on the strength of that manuscript. Whilst that's a great story, I suspect it's going to be very hard to make that happen. So if you make sure that your work is as appropriate to what they want to buy as possible, you're already a few steps ahead of many others who will. I mean, it is surprising how many people will go to all the effort of doing a huge amount of writing, finishing a manuscript, and then will decide to send it to an agent for military history. And it doesn't take a lot to do that research, but also it makes you look a lot more professional, a lot more marketable, because whatever stereotypes there are about writers, agents and publishers are professionals. They're in business to make money, to support careers, and if they feel confident that the writers they're working with have got a share that degree of professionalism, I think then it sets everything on a front foot. You had a question?
Yes. I heard quite a while ago this saying that before you publish the book, you need to make it known way before you publish it. For example, putting chapters of it on your website or something, blogging about it. There are so many ways to approach it nowadays with the explosion of the blogosphere. What is your opinion about it? Do you think it's a good idea to put it out there for people to read, and that say to your publisher, for example, I've got this awesome readership, these so many people are checking it out every day. Do you think that is an indicator? Do you think
if you're going to go down that route, you have to commit to that, and commit to saying, I am going to self-publish, I'm going to go down this alternative route, and I'm not even going to submit to publishers until I have built myself an audience of thousands or whatever it takes, do the sort of Amanda Hopkins or whatever, really go for it. What I wouldn't do is put a few chapters on your website and not really promote it, and then go to a publisher and say I've put chapters on my website, and I've had a few hundred hits, and I wouldn't be half and half about it. I'd do one or the other, because also I think you hit once you put your chapters out there, you hit certain copyright issues of has it been published first or not. I'm not sure what precisely this is, but there might be. I mean, you would have to really go for it and really demonstrate that this is self-publishing success. That's my feeling about it personally.
I don't know. I think I'd probably think the same sort of way. I mean, there are certain. It's like that the publishing industry is slightly skewed by these kind of really bloated, monstrous examples of, like the sort of 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon, which is a kind of self-published thing that then just gets picked up by publishers. But it feels like it's the same principle in a way, that if what you're trying to do, and I think this is what this is what Sarah was talking about this morning, if what you're trying to do is get a publishing deal, and your strategy for doing it is to try and have a runaway internet success, then to some extent the two feel like, well, if you had a runaway internet, then they will come to you, I suppose. There's a certain sense in which often those writers are really committed to their work and they put it out there in some form, this is the seizing the means of production themselves, and they found an audience for it, and then the kind of pack of wolves follows. But I'd be surprised, usually it comes out of the sense of, well, I can't get published, so this is my only option. And then they found that, because publishers don't know, it's the same with the film industry, nobody knows anything. No one knows anything. I remember when I was, and this is not, I mean, my novels were, when they were published around 2002, 2003, but I remember at those publishers' parties, you get taken to these things, and in the corner there would be some group of heavy drinkers, and my editor would always say, that group over there are some of the 30 people who didn't pick up the J.K. Rowling novel. So you'll find there are always these examples where no one knows anything. And it's about timing, it's about luck, occasionally it's about the quality of the book. But I mean, there are a whole range of other factors over which you have no control. All you can do is the best you can, hope for the best. So, I mean, I don't know if that's an answer, it's a response. But
I think another approach to that is to ask whether you can use the publishing on the internet or self-publishing as a way of gauging appetite. Not necessarily seeking to make a runaway bestseller, but both you, Anna, and Nick, pointed out rightly that actually the means of publishing is now pretty much within anyone's grasp technologically, which is really quite new. But that's quite different from selling.
Yeah.
Anna, can you come on?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really interesting things going on right now. I think it's absolutely true that publishing is not in crisis, it's just evolving, and no one knows quite which way it's going to go. But I do think when you're making that choice about publishing online or publishing traditionally, it's thinking in the long term about your career. Where are you going to be? Where do you want to go? And if you absolutely feel